For Austin Live Theater, this is Michael Maggs. I wanted to talk to you today about The Grapes of Wrath, which is currently on at the Zach Scott Theater. Austin Live Theater ran a very favorable review about 2 weeks ago, but the show has remained in my mind, and I wanted to communicate to you a little bit why I think this is a really extraordinary show, and one that probably should not be missed by anyone who really enjoys theater of depth and significance. Of course, it's based on John Steinbeck's famous novel, which was by and large the basis for the Swedish Academy eventually awarding him the Nobel Prize in 1973. It's the story of a family, the Joads, in the 30s, who left the Dust Bowl of the Midwest, Oklahoma, and their exodus on their way to the promised land of California. They are exploited, they suffer, members of their family die en route. It's a grand journey, and it's one which affected Steinbeck very personally. His novel is a very thick, very complicated novel. In some ways it's difficult to read, which is probably why a lot of us don't have particularly good memories of it, since we may have had to read it in high school when we didn't have patience for that. But about 20 years ago, the Steppenwolf Theater took the dialogue that Steinbeck gave to the Joad family and made a play from it, and it works wonderfully well. And on top of that, the production at the Zach Scott Theater, which is now underway, delivers that story and those people with a cast and production values that are really, really memorable. A lot of these actors we've seen before. My favorite in the cast is Mark Pouet, an impressive actor who's very, very busy in the Austin scene. He was Macbeth for Austin Shakespeare last year. He's done a role in Cyrano de Bergerac. But this role as Jim Casey, the preacher who has lost his faith and attaches himself to this wandering group, the Joads, is a performance of real depth and stature, typical of Mark Pouet, but one which opens very, very deep questions. Casey, having lost his faith, he was once a very well-known preacher. He has two occasions in which he's urged to pray by the Joad family. One is at a family meal, and the other one is at a burial. And his prayers are more reflections, and frankly they are heartbreaking. In one of them he recalls how he himself went out into the wilderness like Jesus. He's not saying that he was Jesus, but after a while he looked around and he began to see how the rocks and the stones and he himself were all holy. And yet after a time he realized he didn't know the meaning of holy. Jim Casey is a Christ figure, there's no doubt about it. There are very strong biblical themes in this play. Not only the Exodus, but there's an older son, handicapped, somewhat simple-minded, who gets to the Colorado River and decides that he, Noah, will stay there by the water. So there is eventually no Noah with the family when they are attacked by a storm and a deluge. The arc of this story is generally downward. Jim Casey, being a Christ figure, at one point takes on himself the blame that should have attached to other settlers. He goes to prison. When he's eventually let out, he becomes involved in a workers' strike. He's very enthusiastic about it. And young Tom Joad from the family gets involved in a terrible, terrible moment. Casey is attacked and cut down, beaten with axe handles, and killed. He has sacrificed himself for the family, and to what end? This is really Steinbeck's question here. To what end? He himself experienced the conditions in the camps in the mid-30s, and he actually saw people dying of hunger, and inflamed by this, he wrote his novel in less than a year, working very, very intensively, saying that he had to get it right because He was writing about history as it was happening. Another performance I praised in the ALT review, and which is really remarkable, is that of Janelle Buchanan, who plays Ma Joad, the central figure. In this play, the men are always struggling and striving and trying to figure out what did they do wrong? Why did they merit these terrible disasters? But Ma Joad is indomitable. She continues, and as she says, menfolk live life in jerks. A man dies and a baby is born. A man buys a farm, a man loses his farm. But women continue. They're like water. They're like the stream that goes forward, rippling, going over the waterfalls. And we, the people, will continue. Lots of other terrific actors here. Dirk Van Allen, who's well known to Austin audiences as a character actor, has 3 or 4 lovely bits, including one principal role as Grandpa Joad. And he's always amusing, comic, and perfectly on target. Jarrett Mallon, we mentioned in the review on ALT, does just an amazing transformation from the elder son Noah to various other characters in the camps. Paul Mitchell Wright is particularly interesting as Uncle John, an older, bewildered man who in the past has lost his wife, and he's wondering if perhaps his inaction there was part of the catastrophe that brought along this downfall. Production values are tremendous. I enjoyed the music. It lightens up what's really a pretty sad story. There are dances, songs, some Woody Guthrie, and it's really enjoyable to watch, and at the same time very effective. I should mention as well Xochitl Romero from UT, who has played wiry characters in the past, for example at the Hyde Park Theater. Here she's Rose of Sharon, who is pregnant, looking forward to having her child, meets disaster, and the last terrifying scene of this play is when, with her breasts full of mother's milk, she takes in an unknown man. We never even see his face, and she suckles him with her mother's milk. It's an affecting scene. It's terrible, and yet it's at the same time sublime. Grapes of Wrath is a very impressive piece. It's American history, mythopoetic, very strong. Curiously enough, the situation of the Okies in California was not solved by social activism, which is really what Steinbeck was advocating. It was resolved by the surge in the economy in California, largely related to the oncoming needs for World War II, aircraft industry, light industry in general, and fruit picking, which the Okies were there, and they were the first migrant workers in that scene who were exploited, and eventually as citizens they were able to move beyond that. The Zach mentions the plight of the homeless today. It mentions the lessons for a downturning economy. They don't mention that this is a play really about migration. But that's probably just as well, because the Okies were citizens and they were entitled to their rights. Migration problems that we have today are much more complicated. They involve legal status, they involve citizenship, they involve the need for actual intervention by legal means, by legislative act and executive act, and a social consensus, which we just don't have. The Grapes of Wrath, Zach Scott Theater, this is well worth your time. For Austin Live Theater, this is Michael Mendes.